Hello everyone and welcome to Qualification Race 2 in Season 6. Today we are at Hirochi Short, which is a much more technical circuit than Lakeside was. So let's talk a little bit about the track. Now at the end of the main straight, which is rather short at this track, you have turn 1, and turn 1 you want to get the nose turned in early and basically ride the curb all the way on the inside line until the end of the corner. And then this transition here to the second corner can upset the balance on some cars depending on their brake balance, their suspension balance. Then you get into this downhill and then later uphill right-hander that tightens towards the end, and then into a chicane. And then after this chicane you have a very short straight and basically a 180 degree right-hander that also becomes tighter towards the end. Then you have another short straight and you have a left-hander, rather slow, can also, like that brake zone there can also determine whether or not the car is going to get a good time. Some quick left rights, and then you have the final corner, which is a long left-hander. Again, you want to ride the inside there, and then you cross the finish line. Alright, on to our first head-to-head, the Coventry Climax versus the HFF Cake. The HFF is going to be a little bit faster than the main straight, well, a lot faster if the straight was longer, but for the first corner they are pretty much neck and neck, because the Coventry got a much better entry for the first corner, but the HFF was able to pull towards the inside later on. Generally speaking, the HFF, as I mentioned last time already, is sometimes pretty twitchy on transitions, like you can see here on the chicane. I was so careful with my inputs there on the transition, and still it went fully sideways there. But when you do manage to carry the speed, then the HFF is significantly faster, as you can already see from the footage here. It's way ahead of the Coventry, and these chicanes here are also a little bit iffy, but not as much as the earlier one, because the corners are spaced out more from each other, and the HFF is going to cross the finish line first in 106.5. On to our next head-to-head, the Blue Streak versus the Minos. Those two cars were pretty close to each other at Lakeside, with the Minos coming out about 0.3 of a second faster. And both cars are just excellent here, although the Minos has one weakness, and that is its braking performance, and that weakness is going to show a little bit more here at Hirochi than it did at Lakeside, because there are just more braking zones. Here they're still even for these corners, but for the chicane the Blue Streak was already better on the brakes. It's already got just a small lead here. You're barely able to see it here, and the Minos is going to make up for most of it here on the straight, because it is a little bit faster. But this braking zone here, the Blue Streak was able to brake much later, and while it did go sideways through the corner, it kept most of the lead, and so it will arrive at this final corner earlier. It can also brake harder, and then it gets a good line through the final corner just as the Minos does, and the Blue Streak finishes first in 106.1. On to the next head-to-head, the Catan Corsa versus the Vento XF Caldera. The Vento won this head-to-head quite convincingly at Lakeside, because it's just quite a bit more powerful, and they were fairly even at handling on Lakeside. But here the Catan Corsa feels like it just has a lot more bite on the front end. It just turns more quickly, and it also doesn't oversteer as much as the Vento does, and as a result the Catan Corsa is actually the much more balanced car here, much easier to drive quickly through these corners. And that, as you can see, means it's already got quite a lead here as they come up towards this relatively slow left-hander towards the second checkpoint. And through these chicanes the Catan Corsa is also more stable, and it also is quite a bit quicker through this final corner here, And as a result, it'll take the win in this head-to-head with a 106.6. On to our next head-to-head, the THRS versus the Scarab. And at Lakeside, the THRS was definitely the hardest car to drive, while the Scarab was one of the easiest. And here, the THRS is still the hardest to drive because it oversteers everywhere and always, while the Scarab isn't quite as stable here at Hirochi as it was at Lakeside. It just slides about a little bit more. Pretty much everywhere. It's not horrendous oversteer at all. It's just not as planted as it used to be on Lakeside. And that adds up over the course of a whole lap. And while it is still going to handily beat the THRS, as you can see here, as the THRS is just you know, not even stable in a straight line, basically. The Scarab is gonna set a pretty damn good lap as it comes through the final chicanes and the last corner here. Again, a bit unstable on the braking, and then sideways halfway through the corner, and it's going to finish in 106.8. So, the Dacia Amali versus the Sabre 11. Now, the Sabre 11 came second at Lakeside, and yeah, it got a pretty wide entry there, but then it did pull in towards the inside, as you can see here. And while somehow the Scarab felt less planted at Hirochi than it did at Lakeside, for the Sabre, it's the other way around. It feels more stable here than at Lakeside, and it feels less sketchy under braking or under hard turning. It does still like to oversteer, but it's more controllable now than it was at Lakeside, in my opinion. Obviously, it's also much more powerful than the Dacia Amali, which has already fallen behind. It doesn't handle as well as I had hoped it would here, the Dacia, and so as a result, the Sabre is going to take an easy victory in this head-to-head, and it's going to finish with a time of 106.1, just behind the blue streak. And our final head-to-head is going to be the Aero GPF4 versus the Martin 2005 supercar. The Aero won this head-to-head convincingly at Lakeside, and even there we already mentioned how it's not the most powerful car, but it has excellent handling, so we expect it to do very well here too. And as you can already see, it's got a significant lead over the Martin already, and coming through this chicane, it's got a sizable lead over the Martin. And to be honest, this was my pre-race favorite, and it is definitely going to show up a good lap here. The Martin is, you know, just a little bit low on power and just not as agile as the Aero, but also has a little bit more oversteer coming out of the corners. So the suspension balance, while not unmanageable by any means, is just not on point like it is on the Aero. And the Aero finishes in a 106.3. So there it is, the blue streak wins the race only by 4/1000ths of a second ahead of the Sabre, and trust me, I tried again and again with both cars and just couldn't get a faster time than the ones in the video with either of them. But there was a car with which I did get a faster time, and that time would have won. That was the Aero. I got a 105.8, and that is still in my BeamNG high scores. And it did happen while I recorded the session, but when I went back to check the footage, I realized that OBS had crashed about 5 or 6 minutes prior, and so it didn't have that lap from the Aero on record. So technically the Aero would have won had OBS not crashed, but I wasn't able to replicate that time with it. Either way, it's still in third, and we'll still easily make it to the main competition in all likelihood. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.